Welcome, everybody, to Today in Space. We're back for another episode. Today, we're very, very lucky to have the author of SpaceX, Elon Musk, and The Final Frontier, Brad Bergan. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Alex. Thanks for inviting me. It's really good to be here.
Absolutely. So, I love your book. I was going through it today. I, you know, Folks have been listening for a long time, or anyone that's new, we've been following this for a decade here. First, as an aerospace engineer, just seeing the cool stuff, seeing that grasshopper, that first Falcon 9 that was trying to land and do hops. To today, we're at Starship. It has been a journey, and a ton of stuff has happened. And to see basically what is 10 years of my life doing a podcast condensed into this beautiful book is really cool. And I'm excited to talk like all about this. But before we do, I'd love for you to give a quick intro to the folks, who you are, what you do, and what brought you to making this book.
Yeah, of course. I consider it quite a compliment that you think you perceive like 10 years being packed in a way that works well enough in a book like this. So I definitely enjoyed throwing everything I could into it. As for my backstory, I already said my name is Brad. I grew up in a place called Iowa City, Iowa. It's a hometown of the Iowa Writers Workshop. And while growing up there, let's see. I graduated in philosophy English back in 2011, I think December. And then in that town, if you're not a townie or a professor or a teacher of some type or owning one of the businesses, there's not really like a social role you can figure out very easily. So I decided to take off and go somewhere where no one else was learning to write. It seemed like something I might have some talent for. So I flew off um, all the way to Vietnam and
Wow.
landed in Saigon and spent 2 years there. Had a short stint with a magazine that was like multilingual and multidisciplinary, and it was a lot of fun. I got by teaching English as a second language. Then in 2014, I came to New York because I published a short story or two in the US and decided that like we're better to pursue a career as some sort of writer or editor than New York.
Mm.
So I came here, worked my way up, eventually worked for a publication called Bank Innovation. I think it's now Bank Automation. It's on Broad Street downtown. Spent about 8 months there. And I think like as a kid, I should rewind and say that I had a telescope as a kid and I remember Shoemaker Levy 9. So there was like a background of like deep interest in science and astronomy and a kind of nerdy appreciation of sci-fi that went along with that. Fast forwarding into New York, I was while enjoying writing about fintech and Bank of America and meeting executive officers at major banks. I saw that Juno had reached its target of orbiting Jupiter,
Mm.
and realized that this is the first satellite I could think of. I don't know if it was the first probe that had been sent like this, but it was the first time I realized that, wait a second, this is a solar powered spacecraft. Why are
Mm.
we sending that past Mars? Because I feel like there's less sunlight out there. So I just took a gambit, went into the stairwell of the Broad Street building of my job and called Lockheed Martin up, talked to a NASA dude that was there and just said like, hey, what gives? And he's like, oh yeah, and I just did a story on NASA pushing solar power, but that technology as it stood then, probably still now, can't get us with the same kind of science, which is mostly passive instruments on Juno, past Jupiter because the sunlight is like 1/5, I think,
Mm.
of the intensity it is here.
That's
So
right.
you're really working with like the power of a vacuum cleaner, like something like that
Mm.
out there. And anyway, that was my breakthrough in publishing more science stuff. From there, I went to the New School and studied creative writing and fiction. And I spent a year there. And since I was already publishing at Vice and a few other places in science, and then also there was some short stories and an essay, I think, in a little old publication called 3 AM Magazine called Adult Swim. You probably would know the reference for that from our early discussion before this call. Uh, I realized like, hey, I don't have a big account waiting for me when I get out of here, and I'm having quite a bit of debt. So I decided to move into the market. And from then on, I went to futurism, interesting engineering, as senior editor.
Mm.
And I think that's when the pandemic hit. And about 3/4 of the way through my 2 year tour there, uh, a publisher reached out to me, asking me if I wanted to write a book on the space race, the new space race. And that's how Space Race 2 happened. And that did so well that he asked me if I had any other ideas. And I said, well, this one covered the Space Race 2.0, which I think was in 2022 it came out. That
Mm,
covered Musk and Bezos and Branson, Richard Branson and Jeff Bezos. So I figured why not focus in on the name that's become kind of a metonym with the second space race, which is Elon Musk and his company. So that was the second book, and it really honed in on yeah, the development as you talked about, the grasshoppers all the way up to the Falcon 1 through 9 and the Super Heavy and Starship, and now the second stage Starship being caught by the chopsticks just a few days ago.
crazy.
Uh, that brings us full circle. That's how I ended up writing this book.
That's awesome. So this book you started writing, do we have the time right? Like 2020, 2021?
This book, I would say the groundwork was laid in 2022,
Mm,
right when Space Race 2.0 came out.
cool.
And yeah, I already had like a pretty good idea of how I would launch it off and an intro and forward and dig into a company.
So what was your so it's cool to see like science curious guy, into sci-fi and all that stuff. You get into writing and fiction, and then this just curiosity hits you on space with Juno, and then eventually this next space race. Um, what was some of the stuff when you first started digging into this Space Race 2.0 that was surprising to you?
Well, the second space race, maybe I'd start with like the most relatable thing, which is how everyone relates to it.
Mm,
And this might be a little bit too like deconstructy or deconstructive is when you hear about a new accomplishment happening, whether it's like putting a first woman on the moon or having Starlink functioning in some kind of war zone for it's always a we for the first time, this sort of first person plural. That's we. And as I've said at other times, the first surprising thing is that people still think of it this way for the most part. And I think that's why there's kind of like a gap that in some ways lines up with like a political divide, not to go into that kind of a discussion, with the sense of like citizenship and nationalism that people are still, at least linguistically, appealing to. That doesn't really apply in the same way anymore. Like the way we construct meaning out of the events that are happening has changed. That's best I can describe it without using like $10 words from grad school or something.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's interesting, and space is, you know, tied to politics. Maybe less and less as things go more, as the private industry starts taking more
Mm.
out of it, or out of the workload. Um, Without a doubt, I mean, even just the function of how it was back to the nationalism aspect. I mean, the whole, it seems like genesis of going to the moon was a nationalist agenda. It was defense. It was we've got to do it or they have the high ground, and it just seems very difficult to do that in today's world. Although I think China pushes us now more than ever. I just don't. It's not as potent as it used to be. It seems.
Yeah, part of that, digging in a little bit more, I think like in the 50s and 60s, we had this, like it before that, the nationalism was really strong because it was fresh out of World War II. Rah, 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 America's a superpower. And then like, oh no, the Soviets have the nukes. We all have to stick together and look out for the communists behind every, I don't know, car or
Mm,
corner. But then with the 60s came the individual first cult of me, the hippie movement, and everyone saying like we should be prophets of like a future that is free of all of these things. Um, like it was like identity didn't resonate like it used to.
mm,
Like we have identities as like self-mythologizing and access everywhere we look these days, but there's no like unifying purpose in our culture when it comes to space that relates to a kind of me rebelling to the same kind of nationalism. Now it's much more commercialized, you could say, which brings us full circle to like why it's a big surprise because the space program while still like obviously doing good, making more progress than NASA has made in decades, at least in terms of upgrading the technology on the
yep.
first leg of a journey to space. I think Neil deGrasse Tyson was trying to do like he was trying to own Elon Musk and saying like technically, NASA's gone further. SpaceX has yet to test its metal in like deep space. But if you look at Falcon 9, the reusability of the rockets and Starship itself, even without the chopstick catch a few days ago, a week ago, as of speaking now, the first tier of getting to space was the most expensive, which makes sense because what is going to space? It's escaping a gravity well and
Right.
having a bubble that we can breathe in pressure that, won't make us like explode spontaneously and all of that, and survive radiation and so on. And I think that's advanced quite a bit. So even though rather I should say the public-private aerospace nature of this second space race was a big surprise to me that like a lot is being done despite the fact that this doesn't have like a very strong like symbolic relatable meaning for most people. And people are still really into it.
Yeah, no, I hear you on that, and it's been really interesting. The Neil deGrasse Tyson comments were a little disappointing, but honestly, I've heard that, I work as an engineer, so I also work with, engineers in their 60s, 70s that grew up
Mm,
when, they went to the moon, and that's their whole persona is the 60s NASA, and it seems that a lot of those folks are really, really put put off by everything SpaceX. And as someone that was getting my aerospace engineering degree as SpaceX was developing this, to me it seemed obvious. It just seemed obvious that reusability is the way to go. Even if the space shuttle was very expensive and just that
right.
that thesis didn't quite work on a commercial level. Um, it's really interesting to see how much resistance there is from that, I guess you can call it old guard, um, to just realizing how much work is ahead of us. Like, we're going to the moon, but we have nothing there. I mean, we have some satellites, we have some old gear that's been there for decades on the surface. When we're going there, we need to build all of that infrastructure and everything that's going to help whatever this next plan is of living in space long term. And if SpaceX gets it right with Starship, we don't need to build all that infrastructure at first before sending people to the moon or to Mars. Um, do you see that kind of divide from a certain group? I'm just interested with you covering this, what kind of pushback you've gotten and maybe where it's come from.
The pushback I've gotten, if any, I think a part of what I want to go back to like the divide you were talking about potentially
Mm,
being a little bit underwhelmed by Neil deGrasse's comments and the sort of knee-jerk reaction to people who have come to power. In the first book, I called them like Elon Musk space barons, but even since 2021 or two, I think things have shifted so much with like Twitter becoming X and like the public square already privatized, but now being a place where the same like censoring forces aren't working in the same way.
mm,
Um, but I think like the biggest divide right now that's pushing back is a generational one. And the ones who seem to get it the most are the ones that were in the industry the entire time, as opposed to the ones who have transitioned to a media perspective. And I think that kind of makes sense in a way. There's that running trope that, and I don't mean this in that I believe it, but just a sort of like a hyperbolic direction. When
mm.
the quote goes like, remember when you're talking to a boomer, you're talking to the TV,
Yeah.
which is a little bit extreme, but I think what that gets at, the truth that reveals is the sense of like a cohesive, singular narrative
Mm,
that like comprises our reality, whether that's nationalism or the cult of me or it's morning in America or
mm,
whatever it is. That's like a strong unifying force, and I think that changes how people think about themselves. And if they've dedicated their entire life and they're like in their 50s or 60s or even older, that's had like a very deep effect on how they define themselves and the mark they've made on the world. And when someone like Musk comes along and he's playing around with like sometimes millennial, sometimes even like Zoomer, almost
mm.
like quote unquote skibbity politics, just for fun to crack a laugh.
Yeah.
I mean, you can view it as immature, and I think a lot of forces that have made that kind of communication, regardless of the politics, but just a sort of like that not so like deep gravitas, long historical narratives, quick post truth like communicative style. I think that he and SpaceX are more open to making things work with what we have. Dealing with the world the way
Mm,
it is instead of the way it should be. And I think that's not to go on like a huge tangent. I think that's one of the biggest differences between maybe an old guard that transition to media and people that either have been in the industry the whole time or are just getting into it the last 10 years is they grew up and had to adapt and build their lives in the world the way it is, instead of, not necessarily resting on laurels, but
Hmm.
living their lives to a meaning to, in the corner of your living room.
Yeah, I love that you pointed the generational thing because I mean I think anyone that's, we're millennials, even Zoomers, I think anyone with a boomer parent, or uncle or whatever, like even just down to the simplicity of how their lives went and were expected and how the reality of our lives is from housing to schooling to work. Um, I mean, you've described bouncing around for a career. I've done the same. I still have yet to officially, other than this podcast, work in the space industry. I've been adjacent, another industry working for the industry, but that is just the reality of it. And I could get frustrated at it, and I could get mad at the world, and I was for a few years there. But at the end of the day, you're right. It comes down to adapting, and for me and
Yeah.
and for the few folks that I do know that work at SpaceX, um, they're there because it's about pushing the envelope and doing something big. I mean, from the aerospace engineering perspective, like even if you got a job in aerospace, the likelihood that you would work on a mission within 5 years and have something launched to space and be a part of that is as close to zero as as you can get. And a place like SpaceX offered at least the opportunity to be on the ground floor of doing something that could happen. And we can see what 5 years have done for the Starship program, never mind 20 years for everything that they're working on right now. Um, it's it's the place where all those smart people that didn't want to sit behind a desk doing, menial work, that's where they went. Some of them have left, to start their own thing because they had a vision of what they could solve, and SpaceX is and others like Blue Origin and so many others are like creating the space economy. The demand grows, new things happen, and I'm very optimistic after Starship just got caught by the chopsticks back at Boca Chica. To me, this is just
I
gonna.
love that line, by the way. It sounds like an inside joke, but like Starship just got caught by the chopsticks. You
Boop.
know,
No, it's
got
ridiculous.
canceled by something. I don't know. We'll figure it out.
Oh man. All right, folks, let's take a quick break. Let's talk about AG 3D printing. If you guys don't know, that's our 3D printing lab that we have in here. We specialize in rapid development of ideas, just like SpaceX. But we do that for 3D printing and specifically for parts. For years we started in 2016. For years, we've been offering a 3D print service so that you can send us your parts or your ideas and we can help make them for you. And now in 2024 and beyond, we're going the next step. We're now introducing the Part Detective. That is giving you access to the almost decade of experience that I have designing, troubleshooting, and working around the problems of 3D printing so that you can be successful. Now it's available to you. So if you go to ag3d-printing.com, you can check out, we have our schedule that's available. You can book time with us today. You can also email us at ag3dpartdetective and just start the conversation. See what you're looking for. I can see if I can help, and then we can go from there. And one of the great examples that's perfect for right now is, let's say you are looking to get someone you love a 3D printer for Christmas. It's a common scenario I've seen many, many times. Do you know what you're looking for? Do you know what printer you want? Do you have an idea of what your loved one wants, but you're just not sure what to get? There's a perfect reason to book the Part Detective. So you can book 30 minutes with us. We can go through all of that. I can ask you a bunch of questions and dial in the different printers based on your budget, based on your needs, and most importantly, so that way that printer doesn't end up on a shelf gathering dust. You know you've bought the right one, and then the person that gets it, depending on their skill, their age, their experience, they're going to be able to use it. So that's the Part Detective at ag3d-printing.com. Book 30 minutes with us today, and there's so many different ways you can use it. Go check out the last episode to learn more about that. That's ag3d-printing.com. Email us at ag3dpartdetective@gmail.com. And that's it, folks. Part Detective. Cool stuff. Leverage our experience today. Now let's get back to the show. I'm interested to hear what do you have like a how would you describe Elon Musk? I guess because we're right now he's become a very divisive character of his own somewhat of his own accord. And I know there's a lot of people who are talking. I was in New York Comic Con this weekend, walking the streets, and a lot of young folks were talking about Elon, whether it was Tesla and the Tesla bots or SpaceX and the Starship. Um, I'd love for someone who's done the research on the history of this very interesting person. How would you describe Elon?
Well, he has a very, well, it's not a very common origin story, even for like a person who's well off in the USA. I mean, from South Africa, coming to America and fundamentally changing, not just one industry, but several industries. And then not even only industries, but also like how society works when all of that just changed a few years before he changed it again. I
Mm,
mean, this is a man who came from South Africa selling electric vehicles, which was sold as like a fool. It was perceived as a fool's gold for decades by the entire automation or automotive industry. And then in the middle of him doing that and launching a few rockets and landing them again in the 20 teens, or from the beginning to the end, we went from the Occupy to BLM to Me Too movements and then some. And like everyone
mm,
had to confront whatever their perspective on that was, a completely different kind of environment and the way social media allowed or didn't allow, depending on your perspective, to basically say what you wanted. And then to take that also and switch it around. So I guess like starting from the outside, I don't really like to use words like innovator, a new industry, because I feel like they don't really mean like resilience in the face of danger and challenges. But I think this is one of the few people where words like innovator actually apply
mm,
because it's unprecedented. And not all progress is necessarily good, but I think that when he has the option, he tries to do what he thinks is the best. And going to how he thinks about things, I think he'd speak pretty clearly about himself that he is a strong proponent of a first principles attitude about things, which I think is great from an engineering perspective, and it's probably very great from a business perspective too, with a
mm,
few exceptions here and there. Uh, um, Personally, I could see how it would rub a lot of people the wrong way that are more used to operating within certain official narratives that you would read on like mainstream publications. And sometimes, there are pros and cons to someone being sort of like allegedly sort of like I'm not saying he is at all, but in terms of like mimetic speak, like someone who isn't afraid to sound like he's a little autistic and actually say
mm,
so and joke around about it and be irreverent toward a lot of holy cat sacred cows of
mm,
like our modern morality, which is like constantly turning inside out. So I mean, he's a wild storm of a presence. He's sort of like this like anamorphic presence that's changing, constantly changing how we perceive things. And now he's like not the runner-up in any sense. I heard someone say that earlier, but supporting one of the presidential candidates pretty directly.
mm,
So it's kind of strange that this is a man whose presence has bled into the most powerful industries and the most powerful political houses and institutions in the country pretty quickly. Personally, I think I go far enough depth on that in the book, like that he was from South Africa, and then he didn't have a really great time at school, and he didn't have a very good time at all with his dad,
mm,
and he and his mom had to go to Canada, and he kind of had to start all over again several times. And I'm sure there was like help here and there and lucky breaks along the way. PayPal, I think, was his biggest first break in terms of like having a sizable amount of money to invest in something like the future. And of course, like he met Robert Zubrin, and that's a lot of why like Starship's strategy for getting to Mars is more likely to work as opposed
mm.
to waiting a long time until we build like some kind of super space shuttle or something.
Yeah. Could you give the folks anyone who's not familiar with Robert Zubrin because we do have a few space noobs in here. Could you give a quick 2 cents on who he is?
Yeah, Robert Zubrin is a kind of old, you mentioned the old guard earlier, and I don't know to what extent. I used to know, like in 2017, to what extent he was actually involved with like the early days of NASA or the mid days. But I know that in the 80s and 90s too, I think he went before Congress or the Senate in both and basically pitched this idea he had, being a very well-educated, I think double PhD in I think at least one of them was aerospace engineering,
I think
and
that's right.
another
Yeah.
one was something else. Might have been theoretical, like physics as well.
Mm.
I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that. I guess I'm lying, so it doesn't matter. But he argued the case for Mars Direct and then Mars Indirect when that didn't work. And he talked to there's a scene where he's talking and making his case very ardently, almost like with a mad fury, like
Mm.
screaming into the microphone as if he's like disciplining a child, but he's talking to like freaking Congress that we have the
Yeah.
technology, we can go to Mars and by sending a rocket there that will basically do like I think it's electrolysis and
Mm.
convert the air and the material on Mars so that there's water and fuel and oxygen waiting there, and then another ship that could be identical would go to Mars, and the next time Mars is in its closest path to Earth, and the return vehicle would already be ready to go before humans ever got there. And Mars Indirect was when that wasn't approved, it was another attempt that he made. That it was just like a small modification of that. That would, I think, just basically multiply the number of starships that would be there. So not starships in the Elon Musk sense, but figuratively, some kind of starship that would
Mm.
land on Mars. And so that when the astronauts started going there, they could go straight into potentially being colonists, as opposed to having to come back right away. But essentially, Robert Zubrin was the person who pioneered the idea of stripping down all of the highfalutin technology and expensive space shuttle proposals of NASA in the 80s and turning it into something that could just use what we have the way we did in the 60s to get to the moon to get to Mars. Cheap, quick, efficient, and safely and back. So that we could say we at least did it and then build on that and start actually becoming multi-planet species. And Elon Musk was one of his proteges in terms of thinking, and a lot of his ideas for the architecture of the missions for Starship and its purpose are sort of like grandchildren or godfathered by Robert Zubrin.
Mm. Yeah, and if anyone's interested in learning more, the case for Mars is
Ah,
that is the one to read, for sure. And I know there's been a few moments where I know the Mars Society puts on a conference every year, and I know that those conversations with Elon have even produced a change in Elon's mind as far as like how they approach going to Mars. I think the South Pole became, uh, or the South Pole of the moon. I don't remember what it was, but I know there's been many times where just having a discussion with him, I think we've seen it with Tim Dodd's Everyday Astronaut recordings, where just he's open to changing his mind when a new idea comes up. And there's been a recent video that's come out with someone interviewing him, and he was sharing a story of the early days when they were trying to figure out Starship and innovate fast enough. And he was just saying, he was leaving the meeting saying, don't quote me, but, uh, you know, we're never going to get there in my lifetime if we don't figure this out. And there's
right.
this drive for making it happen in our lifetime. And when I look back, and even today, we saw it with the Boeing Starliner incident. That's just a peek into the different mindset that exists in the space industry. Um, there isn't that extreme drive to finish a project, and it seems like a lot of the way that these projects were being funded before SpaceX were these big bloated contracts that allowed for timelines to be extended and more money to be added and not necessarily guaranteeing a conclusion. Um, and it seems like the folks who were the beneficiaries of those budgets are the most upset with
Yeah.
SpaceX and
That's
Elon.
a really good superposition. I think that you might be subtly working in there between his personality and the way that he's always willing to, if you talk to him straight and he can tell that you're thinking about what you're saying, he's open to like good ideas and changing his way of thinking. That's extremely rare with anyone that has serious power in today's day and age.
Mm,
And that's been the case before in a long time history. But the a lack of that, the opposite of that, is ex precisely what we've had in other institutions. Not necessarily saying that NASA is just like this, but working with like the congressional budget on like a 4-year program or an executive. branch program to get to Mars sometime this decade doesn't really work, and people have tried it over and over again. Different presidents have tried it. Bush
Mm,
had an idea, Obama had an idea, Reagan had an idea,
yeah.
and it just doesn't get done because then you're stuck there. And the people that try to on the other side of it, people that at these institutions, federal institutions that are supposed to put these ideas together and build a new architecture to get to space, a new mission plan, they end up of course, benefiting from the pay and from the programs that are there. And I'm not saying this is true of any specific institution, but what happens with bureaucracies that have a not like a hard line or someone driving or holding a fire under their rear end to get to the end goal
Mm,
is that you have these little fiefdoms pop up. And it can
mm,
be like just like this endless bureaucratic geometry where the end goal is no longer the point, and you're just living in like this purely ironic, probably postmodern in a funny way if you're not stuck in it and you don't really care about the goal. But that's something that Elon Musk knows how to deconstruct and break down.
mm.
And I think that's why, and I can't say whether this will work or not, but his whole like, what is it, Department of Getting Everything Done or something is like Doge idea,
Yeah.
where he
Yeah.
just wants to
Government
break down
efficiency, I've heard
bureaucracies.
too. Yeah.
Government efficiency, that was
Yeah.
it. That's better than getting stuff done or getting everything done.
But it works.
Uh, yeah, it definitely works as an acronym.
Yeah.
And for space missions, it definitely works a lot better. And that really plays into it reflects his personality, I think, of just like stripping down
Mm.
all of the noise, cutting down the fiefdoms, just get to the end goal.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's the thing. I mean, to give you my 2 cents on how I feel about Elon today, I think I'm more focused on the people that work at SpaceX now than really talking about Elon per se. Mostly because I get concerned when he gets involved into too many other things, although he's proved he can handle it. I don't know how he does so many things, but um I worry that he gets distracted by things that are going to cause these goals, these original goals of, making life interplanetary, and everything they're doing with Neuralink and Tesla. Um, I so I get concerned about that.
Mhm.
But I think now the position he's in, he's kind of forced in that position. Otherwise, he has to shut up and be a good boy. Um, because people are really trying to stop him now.
If you take like the most credulous interpretation, like Musk has purely noble ideas and he really wants to get us to Mars, and that's always foremost on his mind. You can build a narrative and say like almost everything except for like some of the bitter tweet exchanges with other billionaires.
Mm,
Everything he's done has been in the goal of getting certain bureaucracies or red tape or green tape or blue tape out of the way so that he can do that in the most efficient way possible as quickly as possible.
yeah.
Why launch Tesla? You don't have to like revolutionize the car industry because that will give him some footing in the industrial mechanics of America, as a big powerhouse. And he can establish himself as someone who's leading the way in an industry. And then, of course, why do SpaceX? It's to get us to Mars, but then why do each step of it? Because he's showing his company and him are showing with each step from Falcon 1 to the chopsticks with the first stage of Starship that we can do the first leg of the journey differently. Why by Twitter? It's exceedingly difficult to push forward a plan to make the entire species, not every single person, but to make our species multiplanetary or interplanetary when you can't really say what you mean and you
Mm,
can't really communicate to the people about what you're doing without a lot of bureaucracies with fiefdoms having their 2 cents on turning it to their advantage. And
mm,
as someone who comes from media, I definitely will confirm that this happens a lot and continues to happen. And I think it's always happened with in terms of like media and journalism. It's just a matter of degrees. So if we give like a really credulous interpretation, a lot of the distraction is by necessity.
yeah.
Like every time you make a little bit of progress, and this is how it goes if you're doing engineering, as you know, and that's why I actually started as an engineer and I really, really love the mathematics. But then when I got to the engineering, I got to my first circuits test, and I was like, what is this like weird like broken Game Boy with all these holes in it. What am I supposed to do with this? Like I can't do like a Laplace mesh theorem analysis and all of this. That was too complicated for me. I wanted to stick to the pure mathematics and stuff. But whether you're doing engineering or you're running a business, like you're constantly running into facticity, you're running into contingencies as you're
Mm,
trying to achieve some sort of transcendental teleological goal. So a lot of that I think is just by necessity. The other side of it is also his personality, and everybody has flaws. Um, and I think that his flaw is he can be too open-minded and too easily distracted by
mm,
things, which is true, I think, of most people that are worth talking to, I
mm.
think, can be too easily distracted. And there's a lot, now that he owns X, I mean, like it's like meme central. Like, what better place to be distracted is there
It's
than on
true.
X.com?
He's on there all day. It's really he's one of a kind in that in that way.
Yeah.
Um, the thing that I most respect about him, and he's influenced me. I run Today in Space and our 3D printing company, AG3D. The whole reason for those two is because of the way that he's built his businesses and thinking about stacking work and building one thing to support the other. And I've learned so much in that. Um, but today I have so much respect for the pain that he's willing to put himself through and the fact that he will sleep on the floor of the place that he's working at uh, to get it over the hump. We saw that with Tesla. He did that in SpaceX. He continues to do this at Starbase. Um, I don't know many billionaires that can be that hands-on in the operation of a business and be still so influential in the literal science of making it happen. Um, and still leading a team. Like he's brought so many amazing talented people and kept them, which again, for a billionaire and a business owner of doing these crazy things and pushing its people, even if everything goes well, he's pushing these people that are working for him to the absolute limit every day. And, I have so much respect for that, for him. And I think all the other things that come with that are, you know, he's a human at the end of the day.
It's like the ultimate startup, but in a sense, it's also like an exception. I've worked in a lot of startups, and most of the ones I worked in, I thought have done like really great work and were definitely worth it. And I think people should pay attention to them, like interesting engineering, which was media that's now a bigger company now. Um, but in SpaceX's case, like one, I think a weird thing is that you're in a startup, yeah, and you have to work late, and only one of you really owns it. So like you'd think that logically that's the only person who should like use the rhetoric like, oh, you should own your job and stay all night and get it all done. But usually when you're working at like some kind of startup, it's like, what are you creating like a dating app for like non-conventional like dating identities or something. There's a sense in which like what are we really doing here? Like is this like a world historical like life-changing
Right.
accomplishment?
Yeah.
But I think like, and I have never, of course, like you would have to tell me because you would know the engineers better than I would in terms of inhabiting the mind of an engineer. But when you're working at a startup and the hours are crazy, you're getting paid pretty well, but the nearly impossible is expected of you all the time. But like the end goal is literally like shining in the sky every night. I
Yeah.
think that might motivate you to want to really surpass your limits. And I think that's so far that's really working for him, working for SpaceX. And
Hmm.
it's working so well that his ability to stack successes are happening with such an increasing frequency that they're starting to merge into each other. And I don't even notice them individual anymore because it was October 13th that the chopsticks caught the Starship booster, which
Hmm.
again feels like somebody got in trouble, but it's the opposite. Uh, but like this success made me completely forget about what I've been looking forward to for years and years and years. And that was the October 14th launch of the Europa
Yes.
Clipper on the
Yes.
Super Heavy. I was like, what the hell? That just happened?
It was the
I
next
didn't even
morning.
know this until yesterday. I was like, what?
Yeah. It's
Like
crazy. It
I
was
was
the
looking
next
forward to it
morning
all
and
year. And then yeah, go ahead. Like that's like the mission in
yeah,
my
no.
mind.
So Europa Clipper, a mission to go to Europa at Jupiter to sniff and smell or taste and smell, as I don't know how NASA was trying to describe it, but take all the scientific readings to go through those plumes that are coming out of the liquid ocean underneath the surface, which could very well hold life. And if they get good data, which we think they will, with everything that we've seen. If there's water, that's kind of been our whole theory right now with anything search for life is if there's water, there's probably life. Um, to the point where even even on Mars, we're thinking about these subsurface oceans and lakes. So this one mission, which has been a giant struggle of getting there. I mean, talk about
Yeah,
it being used as a political football for years.
yeah,
And the fact that it launched on a Falcon Heavy is insane because it was always packaged with, I think it was a ULA rocket, but basically it was you launch this mission on this rocket or it doesn't launch, and that's why it hasn't launched in all these years. Um, and even like a mission like that, like we didn't get any recovery of the Falcon Heavy boosters. They used it all, which is totally fine. Like that's what that mission profile required to give it enough energy to get to Jupiter. It's got to go to Mars and then back
back to
to
Earth
Earth and then on its
and
way to Jupiter.
slingshot out to Jupiter's super distant orbit.
Yeah.
And like it's not necessarily going to like focus directly on life, but like just to, like revisit Europa's potential. Um it has a like that it has an ice shell on top of which like is one of the most radioactive environments in the solar system.
Yeah.
So you think there'd be no life at all. Like I've always wanted to go to Jupiter. You probably have too, but I'm not sure any of us ever will get to, not because we'll die before we have spaceships to go there. It's because how the hell do you survive that environment? Uh
Totally.
but then just underneath the crust, which is pretty freaking thick. This like big ice crust of Europa is an ocean, or potentially an ocean. It's not confirmed, but from looking at its mass and how it behaves and the way it's pulled by Jupiter, immense gravity, we think that there could be an ocean that is nearly 100 miles deep.
Hmm.
And I think like I wrote down earlier that the Mariana Trench, the Challenger Deep of the Mariana Trench, is 6.7881 miles deep. So
Wow.
I mean, more than 10 times deeper than the deepest point in the Pacific Ocean on Earth. And it's the entire moon under
Hmm.
this crust. So like all of that volume, just like endless dark abyssal. If you go up, you're just going to reach like an ice crust. There's no surface to go to and you wouldn't want to because of the radiation. And if there is
Yeah.
water, because of the way, I don't remember what this process is called,
Hmm.
but it's like why Io is so volcanic. Um, like the gravitational like pulling, compressing and pulling on
Yeah.
Europa heats the core. And if that's happening and there's an ocean, there's a good chance that there'll be geothermal vents deep in its ocean. And since you can't be on the surface where photosynthesis would need to happen because everything would die from the immense radiation, you might have, I think it's or chemical chemosynthesis. Not like chemo, that makes me sound like cancer, like cancer treatment.
That's exactly where my mind went
I
to.
think it's chemosynthesis or something like that. And it's just like getting energy from the chemicals expelled from geothermal vents, which happens on Earth, of course. People have seen
Hmm.
like all the science videos of like these big black, dirty chemical plume coming out. And that's what might be there. And if that's a lot of if then
Yeah.
theorems, but if there's an ocean underneath and if it's warmed enough that there are these geothermal events and if a few other things that happen, then there could be definitely at least microbes and maybe more.
Yeah.
There's that movie Europa, which makes it a little darker but more fun.
What
But
did you
that's
think
from
of
a
that
while
movie?
ago. I loved it. I wanted more. I want that. It should be like a franchise by now, I think, but I don't think it's gonna happen.
No, I think I loved three-quarters of that movie. I think they lost me at the end. But I agree. I would definitely watch another of that style for sure.
It kind of lost like scientific,
I think
like
that's what,
the
yeah.
realism fell away. Like you're on the surface. Oh no, I'm just gonna go out and take a sample in my spacesuit.
Why, why would you
It's
go
like
out? Yeah.
no, you only have like 30 minutes and you have to come back. I'm like, I don't know you'd have that long. And it's like, oh, you've fallen through the ice like you're in like the Great Lakes. And now you're saying, no, it's a little deeper than that. Um, but yeah, it was a genre of film like found film or something
Mm,
from like the 2000s. Uh, anyway, it was one of the
yeah.
latter ones of that, and I thought that was a really, really cool take on that. But for viewers that don't know, if you like space at all, you should watch this film from like 10 years ago called Europa. It's just about a
It's
crew of
definitely worth a watch.
astronauts that go
Yeah.
to Europa in the future, and it's told in a sort of, perfect past tense by the NASA administrator of the program, all fictional, um, about this crew that went to Europa and then like what they found there. I won't
Mm.
spoil it for you.
No, it's it's a good date night movie. It's just a great movie if you're just trying to, you know, find something cool to watch. Um,
Yeah.
what other sci-fis? You mentioned you grew up on sci-fi. What was your sci-fi that got you in that you loved back in the day?
Well, I read a lot of let's see, C.S. Lewis. I read all the Isaac Asimov. I probably
Mm,
had a list of hard sci-fi that's similar to Elon Musk's, only I didn't get into engineering until much, much later and not for long. I was also into soft sci-fi too, like when the entire cyberpunk genre was something that I was digging a long time before college. Do Android's Dream of Electric Sheep and Neuromancer. I think I read when I was in high school. But those are different. Those are more the soft, kind of leaning into soft sci-fi, where it's more about like who are we and what are we, as opposed to can we go and ask the same questions.
mm,
In terms of like more conventional like TV sci-fi, of course, I watched like a lot of Star Trek. I watched all of the Star Wars, and I played a lot of the games related to them as a kid,
nice.
and that was a lot of fun. And probably some of my earliest memories are watching the Star Trek movies. Probably the motion picture might be like the first movie I ever saw, Star Trek motion picture.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely a timepiece, that one.
Yeah, that's a different beast than most cinema then and now.
Mm. 60s, right? Do we have to
No, the
say?
motion picture was a year after the first Star Wars movie. It was 78, I think.
78.
And they
Yeah.
were trying to, like a lot of people were, they were trying to uh recreate the magical commercial success of Space Odyssey 2001.
Mm,
So there's a long entering a weird psychedelic tunnel, several of those
yeah.
scenes in that Star Trek movie.
Yeah, it's amazing. The I think after getting my degree in aerospace and realizing part of the reason why I even got into this um, was from more of a philosophical sci-fi approach, and then realized pretty quickly after doing this podcast that I actually just enjoy talking to people about it and discussing and getting others excited about it. Um, but the philosophy point and looking at the human perspective, I've found is not very common in the engineering fields. And I think I'm realizing that's part of the reason why I didn't fit in as well, at least as I thought it would be. I thought it would just be like, oh, you want to work on the space shuttle? Come on in. We want people, that are interested. But there's there's definitely um, data heavy folks, you know um, who are in the engineering side of it that just have no interest in the human side of things.
Yeah, we also have to understand shows like Star Trek were a reflection of 20th century American, like, liberal democracy and
Mm,
capitalism. So like as people have tried to carry on, first it was Roddenberry, the creator's vision of Star Trek, which was all peace and democracy and no money and the sort of like space socialism, although some people debate that. A lot of things have changed with our culture and society and our economy since then. Like,
mm,
now we're a neoliberal economy that places the health of the market before the health of the people. Or rather, they think the health of the market means the health of the people. And it's like a new version of trickle-down theory.
mm,
And, fast forwarding to the 20 teens and the rise of like digital media and the tech boom and everything that happened with that, you have people who grew up, maybe like they were born in the 2000s and they were just reaching working age like in the late 20 teens. They didn't really have any sort of like symbolic connection beyond like the nostalgia of their parents to a 20th century America and its like ideals reflected in a sci-fi show on like Fox,
mm,
9 or whatever. So that makes a lot of sense. And then there's also just like the traditional reason, like, why go to engineering if you like have parents who need to make money? It's like, well, it's a really safe way if I do well to ensure that I'm able to have a family and have plenty of money and I can take care of my own. And while that might not be the case that it was a few decades ago, that's probably the motivation for most people, as it is for like from engineering to like more hypothetically lucrative
mm.
positions.
Mm,
But I guess that's another reason why Elon Musk is different because he definitely believes in some version of a noble future for humanity.
hmm
And part of that might be related to his generation, which is why it's ironic that a lot of people who are also of his generation, disagree with him, even if they agree with his goals. Uh,
mm,
and I think it's because the means are constantly changing, and it's hard to keep up with unless you've had to force yourself to constantly adapt. And that's something that might be different between Musk and other people who have either from the industry that transitioned into media or other people who are in the top 1%.
mm. Yeah. Yeah, he's an interesting dude. Um, so we're at the top of the hour here.
Mm.
I don't want to take up too much more of your time. Um, Tell us a little bit more about the book and putting it together. Was there anything um for those that have never done that that was really interesting about this book in particular?
I think it's really cool that the title is embossed. I actually didn't know that was happening until I got
Oh,
my
that's
sample
cool.
copy. And I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. No. What's the question? Anything people should know about writing a
No,
book?
or about this one in particular, it's
Oh.
I I love that it's something that could stay, on your desk in front of you, on your bookshelf to keep it or your
Yeah.
coffee table. But
Some
it
of
the
the
yeah.
some of the photos in this book, I think haven't been published in print before. They've been
Mm,
available and you can see them and they're
right.
original, like the photos taken, of course, like in the film itself. Those were in a way printed, but printed in book form. Some of these haven't appeared before. Uh, and a lot of the images that you are familiar with from watching SpaceX's growth over the past 10 to 20 years and its increasing successes bleeding into each other. Those are, we all saw those as like just, something to scroll through on Twitter or
Yeah.
something that we'd see on our screen. But to see that these are actually photos with like the full resolution, um, helps you place yourself. And I think that's what I attempted to do in this book more than anything is for not to get all like high and mighty, but someone at any point in the future, maybe so far in the future that they don't even know what Twitter is, which
Yeah.
would mean that like a lot of us would envy them for not even knowing that.
Yes.
But somebody in that future would be able to read this book and feel immersed
Mm,
in the development of these rockets that were sort of the baby steps of a more serious attempt to make our species multiplanetary. And I think that's what this does the best. And it's really great. I've read some reviews people have written, both on places where you buy it and at a few publications. And people are surprised that like it looks like a casual book that just has like a neat looking cover. But then they open it and it immediately starts with Cold War, the end of the Cold
mm,
War, and Fukuyama's diagnosis of the end of history. And I thread in there are a lot of historical threads, cultural threads, financial threads from the dot-com bubble
mm,
to the pandemic, and how the space race and ultimately SpaceX's rise and Elon Musk's role in it, uh, how they fit into like larger narratives at a time when grand narratives don't really make a lot of sense anymore, as we
mm.
alluded to earlier in this call about like there's not a sort of nationalistic, pre-60s vibe, nor is there like a culture of me hippies vibe.
Right.
There's still a way to make sense of it, and I think I did a decent job of that with this book.
I would say so. I definitely the putting yourself in the seat was really good. And I think the thing that I've been fascinated by has been the all the intertwining events that led up to this. And, as the person who saw the industry I was going into basically fall apart when the shuttle got retired, at
Mm.
least for the demand of it, I started investigating and looking back at the history and just wondering, like, how did I end up here? How did this happen?
Where did we go
And
wrong?
yeah, right. Right. Like I was just following something I really liked. What happened? Um Here I am with a bunch of debt. But it really um it really is from back then, from the 60s, or from the right stuff all the way through, when NASA was just throwing together a plan to compete with the Soviet Union after we had just been allies to take out the Nazis. Um how quickly the world changed. And I have talked about here on the episode about the space conundrum, that we're kind of in the second wave of that, where, when we had the first space race, there was this intersection of technology and progress in space with chaos in culture and in just humanity and everyday life. And we're at that point again. And my positive spin on that was that, the last space conundrum ended with us coming together with a great accomplishment that um, everyone in humanity took credit for, not just the US, even though the flag is clearly a statement. It was something that everyone across the world, took on as theirs. Um, and I think space has that opportunity to do it again, but uh, completely realizing that it's going to get crazier before it gets any better.
Do you mean that the space race will get crazier, or that being
Uh,
on Earth watching it happen will get crazier before it gets better?
I think we'll face the same problems. Like, we see these questions come up, like, why are we spending this money on space programs when, we've got people who can't afford to eat, racial disparities, cultural, problems between groups. I mean, I think that's going to continue. I hope that space can play a role in the, bringing people together again. But I think that part's going to get crazier as space technology and the space industry gets more progressive.
Yeah, I
I
mean, in
don't know
terms of
why they're
like
connected, but they are.
I think they are, or they will have been.
Mm,
I'll put it that way, in a sort of future interior sense. I think that things will have been connected with the space program and SpaceX and other companies that might rise and are on their way up, and the chaos that we're in now. But the next 10 to 15 years, there will be more humans on the moon again, one way or the other. Whether it's SpaceX or
yeah.
somehow Elon Musk says, nah, never mind, I don't want to do it. And someone else from the West does it, or if China does it, like we will go up there again.
Right. Yeah.
Um, but the contradictions that are ripping, say, like the US apart, not to go into politics right now, are not working themselves out.
Mm,
I mean, they're working themselves out in the sense that the antagonism is becoming more apparent and visceral, in ways that are impossible for anyone to ignore. Uh, but uh, I think that that will work out in a way that I can't predict right now. But this having something like SpaceX that, in a way, some ways better, some ways worse, insulated from all the chaos that's happening, I think will have a positive effect on whatever the outcome of what we're going into now with the fire and brimstone and such.
yeah. No, I'm hopeful that I think the big thing was trying to find something. History is really good at kind of giving us some hope that, hey, this has happened before and things ended up okay. I think that's kind of where that space conundrum came from, was just trying to say, hey, this kind of seems familiar. I have no idea how it's going to play out, but we've been here before. Um, because I feel like, especially in America, we're not very good at history in general, and it's a
No,
very
we don't have
valuable
very
thing.
much of it. That's
It's
what they would
true.
tell
It's
you.
true.
If you're in Europe talking to Europeans, that's what they tell me in New York all the time. I walk by and I'm like, oh look, this is where Winston Churchill was born. And I'm like, that's actually a few blocks from where I live. And an Italian girl and what they'll say like, oh, that's quaint. That was like what, 70 years ago? Please, where I'm from in Calabria, there's ancient castles or whatever from 800 years ago. I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
You
I was in
win.
Scotland earlier this year, and the stuff there was insanely old. Um, but especially in the Highlands. But yeah, it's a totally different scale of time. And I love there's a bit that Joe Rogan used to do about, like, America is like 4 people ago or something like that. When you look
That
at
sounds
how,
very Joe Rogan.
right?
I think I just
It
heard his voice and see the folds on his bald forehead as he
I
says
know.
that.
And his eyes basically completely shut. Um, yeah.
Well,
It
let's put it this way then, and then maybe draw to a close on this. Like if things keep going with SpaceX and Elon Musk, and he's able to accomplish something no matter what's happening on Earth and what we're in for in the next decade or two or three with all of the chaos here.
Mm.
The way that Europeans feel about the US and its like lack of a history and our inability to learn from our own mistakes, sometimes even multiple times in the same decade. There could be Earthlings visiting Mars in a century, and Mars being like, "Look, this is where Starship first landed, and like we started building here, and this is where that funny thing happened, and this is our whole world. Our world is really old. Even a few hundred years from now, Earthlings will come and say, 'Are you kidding me? We have stuff that goes back like tens of thousands of years. That's it.
That's
That's
so
all you got.'"
funny. Man, that would be interesting to see the US have to have a baby, I guess, in a way to look at and compare to. They'd actually be able to relate to the Europeans. That'd be funny.
Well, it'd be funny. There'd be a gag in there that someone would have to sit down and work out for a comedy seller. Like you're on Mars and the Earthling like scoffs and says, "That's nothing. We have skyscrapers that go back, 300 years." And then they go to Earth and they're in New York, and then a European says, like, when you're amazed by these skyscrapers, they scoff and say, "That's nothing. We have castles that go back 1,000 years," and so on and so forth. And I don't know. I'm not good at doing like a good punchline for this right now, but that
Now
would be a
we'll work on the
beautiful,
bit. We'll work
yeah, beautiful bit to tell in a comedy seller and the first city on Mars.
I love it. Cool, man. Well, Brad, thank you so much for coming on. I feel like we could do uh plenty more talking about this. And I would love to have you on in the future again, just to chat space and technology and stuff. Because I there's so many things we didn't touch today.
Yeah, and there's so much coming up, every month, every year. I'd love to come on again. This is a really wonderful, amazing time to be alive if you have the time to look at what we're doing in space. So thanks for having me on, Alex. I can't wait to come
Absolutely.
again.
And everybody go check out Brad's new book, SpaceX, Elon Musk, and the Final Frontier. It's a great book. It'll make a great present this year for Christmas. Where can they find it, Brad? Pretty much everywhere.
SpaceX, yeah, you can find it everywhere. It's in some bookstores, but mainly, yeah, Amazon, any greener, e-commerce site you'd like to go to. It's on pretty much any e-commerce site that sells books around the world, from Australia to China to Germany to Sweden and Norway, England, America, everywhere.
Go check it out, folks. Brad, thank you for being on. Spread love and spread science, everybody. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Today in Space. Be well, and we'll see you next time.